This is the story I was sent by a viewer about how he came to know a Bigfoot in Oregon very closely until everything went terribly wrong because of greed. I have anonymized the names and location out of respect, and this is what he told me.
There's a tape in the bottom drawer of my brother's desk. It has been there for 8 years. He has never let anyone watch it all the way through. Not the sheriff, not our mother before she passed, not me until 3 months ago. It is still recording when you press play. That is the thing people do not understand. The camera never stopped. It caught everything that happened on the far side of that creek. And the reason my brother Daniel has not spoken about that summer in 8 years is sitting on that tape, frame by frame, in the leaves where Tommy dropped it. I need to tell you what is on it. I need to tell you about the thing my brother fed for 11 years at the edge of our property. The thing he named, the thing with the split left ear that stood over 7 feet tall at the tree line and watched our house through the rain. And I need to tell you about my cousin Tommy, who came to Oregon that summer to film it up close. He wanted proof. He wanted the whole world to see what my brother had been protecting in secret for a decade. He crossed the creek on a Tuesday morning with the camera running. Daniel turned away for 30 seconds. When he looked back, there was only the camera in the leaves. Last week, something came in the mail that means I cannot stay quiet anymore. So I am going to tell you all of it. And by the end, you will understand why crossing that water was the last thing my cousin ever did. I should tell you who I am because the kind of person telling a story like this matters. I am the younger brother. Daniel is 6 years older than me, and I left our family land in Oregon when I was 19 and did not come back for any real length of time until I was almost 40. I worked freight logistics in 3 different states. I am not a believer in anything. I have never seen a ghost, never had a feeling about a place, never once in my life thought the woods were anything but woods. When people in my office would talk about Bigfoot the way people talk about it, as a joke, as a costume, as a thing on a beef jerky commercial, I laughed along with them. I want you to hold on to that because everything I'm about to tell you, I did not believe when my brother was living it. I thought he was a lonely man inventing a companion. I was wrong in a way I will spend the rest of my life trying to make peace with. Our property sits at the eastern edge of the national forest, up past the last paved road in a part of Oregon where the cell signal dies a full mile before you reach the gate. Our father bought the land in the 70s and ran cattle on the lower pasture until his knees gave out. There is the house which our grandfather built and our father expanded badly. There's the back 40, which is not 40 acres of anything anymore, just a long slope of mixed pine and fir that climbs up toward the ridge. There is the creek, which cuts across the property line maybe 300 yards behind the house and marks the boundary between our land and federal land. And there is the old logging road, grown over now, that the timber crews used in the 50s and that nobody has driven in my lifetime. When our father died, Daniel stayed. I did not. That is the simplest way to say it. Daniel was the one who stayed on the land and ran it alone, and I was the one who sent a card at Christmas and called on birthdays and told myself that someone living that far out in the trees by himself was bound to get strange. Every time we talked, he had a little more of the woods in him and a little less of the rest of the world. He stopped going into town except for supplies. He let the truck go to rust. He kept a notebook, he told me once, of things he was tracking on the property, and I assumed he meant deer or weather or the slow business of a man with too much quiet in his life. I thought he was lonely. I thought he was inventing a friend. I had a whole story in my head about my brother and his imaginary woods. And I held on to that story for years because it was easier than the truth. It is worth admitting how that story protected me. Not him. As long as Daniel was just a lonely man talking to the trees, I did not have to drive out there. I did not have to sit with him in that quiet. I could send the card and make the birthday call and keep my city life with its offices and its airports. And I could tell myself I was the normal one and he was the one who had drifted. When the truth, which I see now, is that he had simply stayed where our father left him and I had run. And the thing he found in those woods, he found because he was the one who stayed long enough and quiet enough to be found. The truth started the way Daniel told it to me, with food that went missing in a way that did not make sense. It was the autumn after our father's funeral. Daniel had taken to leaving the kitchen scraps out past the woodshed instead of carrying them to the compost, partly out of laziness and partly out of grief, the way a grieving man stopped doing the small, correct things. Raccoons, he figured. Then he noticed that whatever was taking the scraps was not scattering them the way an animal scatters. It was taking the food and leaving the dish, not knocking it over, not dragging it off, lifting it, emptying it, setting it back down. He started watching. He moved the dish a little farther from the house each week, out toward the tree line, and each morning it was empty and upright. Then one morning there was a stone on top of the dish, a round river stone, the kind you would have to walk down to the creek to find, sitting in the center of the empty dish like a paperweight. Daniel stood there for a long time looking at that stone. He told me he knew, standing there, that he was not dealing with a raccoon. He just did not yet have a word for what he was dealing with. The first time he saw it fully was a night in November he could give me the exact date for, years later, without pausing. There had been an early snow, just a dusting, enough to hold a print. He had heard the dish move and he went out onto the back step with a flashlight and he swept the beam up toward the tree line and it was standing there. He described it to me the way you describe something you have looked at 10,000 times in your memory, over 7 feet tall. Not an ape, he was firm about that. Nothing like the ape in the costume on the jerky commercial. The face was wide and flat and almost human. A heavy ridge of bone over the eyes, a broad nose, no muzzle, no snout. The hair was a dark rust brown across the shoulders, shading down to near black, matted and long. And the eyes, when the flashlight caught them, did not flare green or yellow the way an animal's eyes flare. They just looked back. He said it was the looking back that he could not get past. An animal looks at the light. This looked at him. Neither of them moved. Daniel said it must have been a full minute. The two of them on either side of that snow before the thing turned and went up the slope without hurrying, without crashing through brush, just folding itself back into the dark between the trees the way smoke goes back into a chimney. And then it was gone. And there was the empty dish. And the one set of prints in the snow longer than his own boot by half again. That was the beginning. What came after was 11 years. I want to be careful here, because the easy thing to do is to tell you my brother befriended a monster, and that is not what happened. And the difference is the whole reason I'm telling you any of this. What happened over the months after that first night was a slow, deliberate, two-way thing. And it was the two-way part that broke my disbelief years later when Daniel finally walked me through it. Because an animal does not negotiate. An animal does not test you and adjust. This did. The food kept disappearing and Daniel kept moving the line of it. And one evening he did the thing he had been afraid to do. He stayed outside, he set the dish down, and he sat on the woodpile in plain view, and he waited in the failing light to see if it would come while he was there. For 3 nights, nothing came at all, and he understood that he had broken something, that being watched while it ate was not part of the arrangement. So he changed. He set the food, and he went back inside, and he watched from the window, and on the 4th night, it came down to the line while he was visible behind the glass. and it ate, and it looked at the window once, and that was the first time both of them agreed on the terms. It learned its patterns, and he learned its limits, and the limit, the one that matters, the one I need you to remember for later, was this. It would tolerate being near him as long as he was still. It would tolerate being watched as long as he kept his distance. The moment he moved toward it, the moment he closed the gap, it was gone, and it would stay gone for days. Patience, it accepted. Pursuit, it would not. Daniel learned that rule in the first year the way you learn a hot stove, by getting burned, by trying once to walk out toward it with the dish in his hands and watching it vanish, and then not seeing it again until the next moon. He told me the moment he knew it was a mind and not just a clever animal, it was the second winter. He had taken to whistling a particular 3-note pattern when he set the food out, the way you might ring a bell, nothing trained, just a habit. And one night from up the slope, out of the dark, the 3 notes came back, same pattern, slightly wrong, like a man humming a song he has only half learned, but unmistakably the same shape. It had been listening. It had kept the pattern. It gave it back to him. After that, he stopped thinking of it as an it, though I will keep calling it that for you because the name he gave it is the one thing of his I am not ready to say out loud. The proofs stacked up over the years, and they were never the proof a scientist would want, never a clean photograph or a cast print, but they were the kind of proof that works on a man living alone with the thing. It moved a fallen branch off the path he used to walk to the creek, dragged it clear, and laid it parallel to the trail. It left objects on the woodpile, a curl of bark worked into a spiral, a bird's skull cleaned white, once a length of old barbed wire wound into a tight coil, gifts that meant nothing and meant everything. During a bad storm one March, he watched it stand at the tree line for the better part of an hour, just standing, facing the house, as if it were keeping watch. And when the storm passed, it was gone. And there was the night it warned him. He had been heading up the old logging road in the dark to check a sound, and it came down the slope fast and stopped in the road ahead of him, blocking him, and would not let him pass. And he backed off because what else do you do? And in the morning he found that a section of the road above had washed out in the rain into a drop he would have walked straight off in the dark. I asked him the way the skeptic in me had to ask, whether maybe he just stopped because a 7-foot thing was in the road and the washout was a coincidence. He looked at me for a while and said, "You can call it a coincidence if it lets you sleep." It did not let me sleep, so I did not call it that. The split ear, the detail I led with, the thing he used to tell it apart from any imagining, came from somewhere in those middle years. The left ear was torn through, an old wound healed wrong, a notch out of the top of it. Daniel never knew how it happened, a fight, a trap, another one of its kind. But it meant that on the rare nights he saw the face clearly, he was always certain it was the same individual, the same mind, year after year, not a rotating cast of animals, one person, returning. I keep using that word, person. I did not use it for years. I am using it now on purpose. Let me give you the 11 years the way I came to understand them, not as one long mood, but as a string of specific nights, because that is how Daniel kept them, and because the specifics are what finally undid me. There was the first winter it came all the way to the porch. Daniel woke to a sound on the boards and looked out. And it was crouched at the bottom of the steps, lower than he had ever seen it hold itself, making itself small, and it had brought nothing and taken nothing. It had just come close in the cold and then left before dawn. He never knew what that night was about. Loneliness, maybe. He understood loneliness. There was the year Daniel hurt his back hauling a downed fur and could not get up the slope to leave food for the better part of a week. He left it by the woodshed when he could manage, close to the house, and the thing changed its range to match. It held at the edge of the lower clearing where it could see the door, closer to the house than it had ever willingly come in daylight. And it stayed there, off and on, for the days Daniel was laid up, as if it had understood that something was wrong and had decided to wait it out where it could keep an eye on him. There was the offering he did not know how to read. A spring morning on the woodpile, a deer, freshly killed, laid out whole. Not eaten, not buried, left for him. Daniel stood looking at it for a long time, the way he had stood looking at the river stone years before, trying to understand what he was being told. Was it a gift, the way you bring food to someone you care about? Was it a sharing of a kill? He never knew. He buried the deer and he left out extra food that night, and the arrangement went on. There was a summer of the other ones. For most of those 11 years, Daniel was sure he was dealing with a single individual, the one with the torn ear, the one mind that returned. But one August, he started finding 2 sets of prints at the line, the familiar long one and a second set smaller and narrower beside it. And twice in that month, he caught, at the very edge of the flashlight, a second shape up the slope that held back and would not come down while the first one ate. He never saw the second one clearly. He came to believe over that summer that the torn ear one had brought someone, shown someone the arrangement, the food and the man and the house, the way you might bring a person you trust to meet someone else you trust. The second shape stopped appearing by September. Daniel never knew if it was a mate, a young one grown, a stranger passing through. But it changed something in how he understood the whole thing. He was not a hobby to it. He was a place on its map, a thing worth showing to its own. There was the night of the dogs. A pack of someone's hunting hounds had gotten loose down in the valley and worked their way up onto the property in the dark, baying, running a line straight toward the creek. And Daniel heard them, and heard underneath them a sound he had never heard before and hoped never to hear again, a low rolling call that came down off the ridge and seemed to move the air in his chest. The dogs stopped, all of them at once, mid-bay, and then he heard them going back down the valley faster than they had come up. And in the morning there were no hounds and no prints of hounds anywhere near the creek, only the long, familiar tracks laid down in a line between the dog's turning point and the tree line, as if something had simply stood between the pack and the property and let them understand that this was not a place they would be coming into. There was the gift he kept, most of what was left on the woodpile over the years. Daniel let go back to the woods, the bark spirals, the bones, the coils of wire, because he felt that keeping them was a kind of taking. But one autumn, there was a thing he could not make himself give back. A flat stone worked, he was sure of it, chipped along one edge into something almost like a blade, almost like a tool. The kind of thing that if you found it in a museum case, you would read a little card about early man and move on. He kept it in a drawer in the kitchen, and he never told anyone, and it is, I think, the only physical object from 11 years that still exists. And I have held it, and I do not have words for what it is like to hold a thing made by hands that were not human hands and were not the hands of any human who ever lived. There was the boundary he tested once, years in, and regretted. A bad night, a low night, the kind of night a man alone in the trees has. And he had wanted badly just once to touch it, to close the last 20 feet and put his hand on the shoulder of the only thing in the world that came back to him. He stood up off the woodpile and he took one step toward the tree line, and it was gone before his second step landed, and it did not come back for a month, the longest month of that whole decade. And Daniel said he sat out every one of those nights with the food untouched and learned in his body, all over again, the rule he already knew. It tolerates patience. It will not be pursued. He never broke it again. He spent the rest of those years on the right side of that line, and he kept the thing's trust because of it. And there was the night the whole family almost saw it, which is the night the secret really became a secret. Our mother, before she got too frail to make the drive, had come up to stay a few days, and she had heard Daniel go out and had followed him to the back step out of a mother's worry, and she had been standing right beside him when the 3 notes came down the slope. She did not see it. The dark was kind. But she heard it answer his whistle, and she heard the weight of it move in the brush. The particular sound of something very large being very careful. And she gripped Daniel's arm hard enough to leave marks and asked him what in God's name was out there. And Daniel made a choice in that moment that he made over and over for 11 years. He told her it was an elk. He walked her back inside with his hand steady on her shoulder, and he sat up with her until she stopped shaking. And the next morning, he told me about it on the phone, years before I believed a word. And I remember thinking, my brother is telling our mother there are elk that whistle. My brother has gone all the way around the bend. He had decided the thing was his to protect, and protecting it meant lying to the people he loved, and he carried that for over a decade. I think about that now, that he lied to our own mother on her last visit to the land rather than risk the thing in the trees. And I understand it as the truest measure of what it had come to mean to him. And there was the winter of the long cold, the year the power went out for 9 days in an ice storm, and Daniel lived by the wood stove and could not get the truck down the frozen road. He was rationing his own food by the end of it, and he had stopped putting anything out at the line because he had nothing to spare, and he felt the guilt of that, the breaking of a 9-year habit, like a betrayal. On the 6th night of the cold, he heard the boards and looked out, and there on the back step, where it had only come once before, was a rabbit, freshly killed, and beside it a scatter of the hard winter berries that grow up on the ridge where Daniel never went. It had noticed he had stopped. It had decided he was the one who needed feeding now. He cooked the rabbit. He has never been able to tell that part of the story without stopping in the middle of it. A decade of quiet. That is a thing to understand before Tommy. By the time my cousin came up that summer, Daniel and the creature had 11 years of careful, patient, mutual peace between them. 11 years of food at the line and gifts on the woodpile, and 3 notes traded in the dark. 11 years of a relationship built entirely on one rule, kept on both sides, never broken. It was the most stable thing in my brother's life, and it took 1 week to destroy. Tommy was our cousin on our mother's side, 24 that summer, and I knew him better than Daniel did because Tommy had grown up nearer to me. He was not a bad kid. I want to be fair to him because he is gone and cannot be anything now but what I say about him. He was a kid who had grown up entirely inside a phone, who measured the worth of a thing by how many people would look at it, and who had convinced himself that he was one good video away from never having to work a normal job again. He had a channel. It had a few thousand followers. He did stunts, urban exploring, abandoned buildings, the kind of content where a young man does something slightly dangerous and films his own face reacting to it. He came up to Oregon that summer because his mother asked Daniel to take him for a while, get him out of the city, give him some air and some work. And within 3 days, Tommy had found the notebook. Daniel kept it in the kitchen, the record of 11 years, the dates and the gifts and the patterns. He had never thought to hide it because no one ever came up there. Tommy found it the way a bored young man finds everything by going through the house, and he read it, and he understood immediately what it was, and the look on his face when he came out onto the porch holding it was, Daniel told me later, the look of a man who has found money in the walls. What happened next happened fast over about a week, and it happened as a series of escalations, each one a little further across the line. first, Tommy just wanted to know everything, and Daniel, who had carried the secret alone for 11 years, and who was, underneath the privacy, achingly lonely with it, made the mistake of telling him. Not all of it, but enough. The food line, the whistle, the rule. Daniel told Tommy the rule explicitly, told him the only reason any of it had lasted was that no one had ever pushed toward the creature, that it would tolerate patience and would not tolerate pursuit, that if Tommy did anything other than watch from a distance, the whole thing would end. Daniel said he watched Tommy nod along to every word of that warning and understood too late that the kid was not hearing a rule. He was hearing a challenge. Then Tommy set up cameras, trail cameras he ordered overnight, strapped to trees along the line without Daniel's say-so. And Daniel found them and took some down, and they argued. The first real argument, and Daniel let him keep 2 of them aimed at the food line on the condition that he did nothing else, that he only watched. The cameras got footage, distant footage, the thing at the line at night, eating, exactly as it had for 11 years. And for Tommy, that was not proof. That was a teaser. He looked at his grainy, distant clips of the most extraordinary thing on the planet, and all he could see was how much bigger it would be if the shot were closer. He started talking about it like a project, like a launch, mapping out how he would release it, how he would not put out the distant stuff at all, how he would wait and get the close shot, the clean daylight close-up, the thing that would change his life. He stopped helping Daniel with the property work he had been brought up there to do. He spent his days editing the distant clips, slowing them down, zooming in until the creature dissolved into a smear of pixels. And he spent his evenings out at the line in a folding chair with the good camera in his lap, waiting, getting closer to the woodshed each night by a few feet, the way Daniel himself had once crept the food a few feet farther out. Except Daniel had been moving toward trust, and Tommy was moving toward a thing that does not survive being moved toward. Daniel told him no. Daniel told him no in every way he had. He told him about the month the creature disappeared, the one time Daniel himself had taken a single step toward it. He told him it would not just leave, it would leave forever. 11 years gone over one bad morning. He took Tommy out to the line one evening in daylight and tried to make him feel it instead of hear it. Tried to make him understand that the arrangement was a living thing with a temper and a memory. That it was not a wildlife feeder, that there was a person on the other end of it who had agreed to terms. And Tommy stood there and listened, and Daniel thought, for one night, that it had landed. But what Tommy had heard, going back through it later, was confirmation that the payoff was even bigger than he had thought. A person, an intelligent one, a relationship. That was not a reason to stop. That was the whole story, the thing that would make the video more than a blurry monster clip. And Daniel had handed it to him. And Tommy heard all of it and went out anyway 3 nights later and baited the line himself with the good camera already running and crept toward it in the dark, trying to have the distance. And the creature broke and ran and did not come back the next night or the night after. Daniel found out the next morning, found Tommy's chair pulled 20 feet closer than it had any business being, and the dish moved with it, and they had the worst argument of the whole summer. Daniel shouting in a way I am told he almost never does. Tommy sullen and certain and already, behind his eyes, planning the next thing. And that was the thing that should have stopped Tommy, and instead it was the thing that fixed his mind. Because the creature went silent. 3 days, 4, no food taken, no notes traded in the dark, nothing. Daniel knew exactly what the silence was. It was the same silence as the month after his own single step, the withdrawal of a thing whose trust has been damaged. Daniel knew it might be permanent. He grieved it like a death, sat out those nights the way he had years before, the food going untouched, the 3 notes he whistled into the dark coming back to him not at all. But Tommy did not read the silence as withdrawal. Tommy read it as a problem to be solved. He decided the creature had simply moved its range, gone deeper, across the creek onto the federal side where Daniel had never followed it. And he decided that if it would not come to the line anymore, then he would go find it. He stopped sleeping. He pored over Daniel's notebook and the trail cam footage looking for a pattern, a direction, a place to intercept. He pulled the trail cameras off the line near the house and moved them down toward the creek, trying to catch which way it crossed. And one of them caught it once at the water's edge before dawn. And that single clip of the thing actually at the creek, actually crossing onto the federal land, was the thing that decided him. He had a direction now. He packed the good camera, the real one, not the trail cams, and he made his plan. And on the surface, he was bright and easy about it, the way that frightened Daniel most, because Daniel by then knew the kid was past listening. The last night, Daniel tried one more time. He stood in the doorway of the room Tommy was staying in, and he told him plainly that if he crossed that creek, he might not come back. That whatever was over there had been pushed for 2 weeks straight and had nothing left to give. That the rule had a reason. And Tommy smiled at him and said something about how Daniel had been alone up here too long and rolled over, and that was the last full conversation the two of them ever had. The morning it happened was a Tuesday in late August. I know it was a Tuesday because Daniel has said the word Tuesday to me more times than any man should have to say a word. It was early, gray, the light not yet through the trees. Daniel woke to find Tommy already gone from the house and the good camera gone with him. And he knew. He went out the back and up the slope at a run, calling. No answer. And the dew was knocked off the grass in a line that led him straight toward the water. He saw Tommy down at the creek, already across it, already on the federal side, moving up into the trees on the far bank, with the camera up at his eye, filming as he went, narrating to himself the way he did, doing the exact thing the entire 11 years had been built on never doing. Daniel went down to the water. He has told me he stopped at the water, and I have never asked him why he stopped, because I think the answer is that some part of him knew that crossing it himself, fast, loud, in pursuit, was the most dangerous thing two men could do at once. And so he stood on his own bank and he called across to Tommy to stop, to come back, to put the camera down. And Tommy on the far bank turned to call something back to him, something cocky, something about the shot, about how Daniel should come see this. And over Tommy's shoulder, up the slope behind him, the trees moved. This is the part Daniel told me only once, all the way through, the night he finally let me see the tape, and I am going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, no more and no less, because I was not there, and I will not pretend to fill in what I did not see. Daniel says the thing came down the slope without hurrying. That is what he keeps returning to, that it did not charge, did not crash, that it came down toward Tommy at a walk, the same unhurried fold through the trees walk it had used to leave him on a snowy night 11 years before, except now it was coming the other way, toward. And Tommy had his back to it and was still talking to Daniel across the water and did not yet know. Daniel says he opened his mouth to shout a warning, and at that same moment he heard it, the sound in the water to his right, a heavy, deliberate movement in the creek itself downstream of him, close, and the trained part of him after 11 years snapped his head toward the sound on instinct, because in 11 years the thing had only ever been in one place at a time, and his whole body believed it could not be both up the far slope and in the water beside him at once. 30 seconds. He has counted them out for me. The time his eyes were off his cousin, chasing a sound in the water that when he looked, showed him nothing, just the creek running gray over the stones. He heard Tommy's voice change behind him, heard it go from cocky to something else, mid-word, a single rising sound that was not quite a word and not quite a scream, heard the camera, and he whipped back around toward the far bank. And the far bank was empty. No Tommy, no movement in the trees, the slope above the creek exactly as still as it had been a minute before, as if nothing had ever stood on it. And down in the leaves at the edge of the water on the far side, the good camera lying where it had fallen, the little red light still on, still recording the empty forest. Daniel crossed then. Of course he crossed. He crossed the creek for the first time in 11 years, and he went up that slope and he searched until his voice was gone, and there was nothing. No Tommy, no blood. He was always clear about that. No sign of the kind of thing you would expect. No struggle written on the ground, no trail. Just a camera in the leaves and a silence over the whole forest like a held breath. He picked up the camera and he carried it back across the water, and that, in the only way that matters, was the end of my cousin Tommy. What followed was the part the world saw, the only part the world saw, and it was nothing like the truth. Daniel called it in. He told the sheriff that his cousin had gone out alone in the early morning to film wildlife and had not come back. Every word of that was true, and none of it was the truth. The search ran for 3 weeks. They brought dogs, and the dogs took the scent down to the creek and across it and up the far slope, and then lost it cold in a place where a scent does not just stop. They brought a helicopter for 2 days. They walked grids through that forest with the kind of care you only see when a young man is missing. And they found nothing because there was nothing to find. And after 3 weeks, the active search became a recovery, and the recovery became a cold case. And the official story settled into the shape these stories always settle into. A city kid, inexperienced, went into rough country alone, got lost, fell somewhere, drowned in a runoff channel, was carried off, was never recovered. A tragedy, a cautionary tale. Case open, pending discovery of remains, and Daniel said nothing. He sat in those interview rooms and he answered every question, and he never once said the thing he knew, because what was there to say? That his cousin was taken across a creek by a person 7 feet tall that he had been feeding for 11 years. He understood that the truth would not save Tommy, who was past saving, and would only cost Daniel his land, his name, his liberty maybe, and would loose every camera and gun in the state on the thing he had spent a decade protecting. So he held the truth the way he had held the secret all those years, alone, and it closed over him, and he stopped being able to talk about that summer at all. He did not tell me. Not for years. I knew Tommy had vanished. The whole family knew. We grieved him in the abstract way you grieve a young man lost in the woods. I did not know my brother had watched it happen from across a creek until 8 years later, 3 months ago, when something arrived that made him decide I had to know. And he sat me down and he took the tape out of the bottom drawer. I have watched it. I need to be honest about what is on it and what is not, because the not is the whole reason I can still sleep at all. The camera fell facing up the slope. For most of its length, it shows nothing but the empty forest on the federal side, the trees, the leaf litter, the gray morning light, and over the top of all of it, Daniel's voice from across the water, hoarse, calling Tommy's name long after there is any Tommy to call it to. That is most of the tape, a man calling into trees that do not answer. But there are a few seconds near the beginning before the camera came to rest, where it is still in Tommy's hands and pointed up the slope. And in those seconds you can see the thing that came down to him. And I'm not going to describe it to you frame by frame, though I could, because Daniel asked me one thing when he gave me the tape, and that thing was that I never described those few seconds to anyone. What I will tell you is this: it did not look the way you would expect an attack to look. There was no rage in it. The face, the wide, flat, almost human face with the torn left ear, the same individual, the same mind, 11 years of the same returning person, was not the face of an animal taking prey. I have gone over those seconds more times than is good for me, and the closest I can come, the only word my whole skeptic's vocabulary will give me, is that it looked like a thing that had finally understood it was being hunted by the one kind of creature that had never hunted it here, and had decided in that morning that it was done being patient. That is all I will say about the tape. They are still searching for Tommy. That is the thing I keep coming back to. 8 years on, the case has never been closed, because you cannot close a case with no remains, and so once or twice a year, a couple of people from the county still walk a stretch of that forest, still poke through the runoff channels, still look in the wrong place for the wrong thing, hoping to find bones that are not there to be found. The family has stopped expecting it. My aunt, Tommy's mother, kept hope the longest, kept it for years, and even she, the last time I spoke to her, did not say the word find anymore. We have all of us quietly stopped believing he will ever be found, and not one of us can make ourselves say that out loud, and so the searching goes on, smaller every year, more a ritual than a hope. Daniel knows they are looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing. He has known for 8 years. He says nothing the way he has always said nothing, and he carries it. The horror in this, if there is horror in this, is not the creature. I have had 3 months to sit with that, and I am sure of it now. The creature kept a rule for 11 years. It was my cousin who could not keep one. The real horror is that Tommy looked at a person, an actual returning mind that had chosen my brother and trusted him for over a decade, and saw a trophy, saw views, saw a shot that would change his life, and decided that this person's 11 years of trust were his to spend in one Tuesday morning. He treated someone like a something, and the woods do not forgive that, it turns out, the way we forgive it down here. Did it come back? I know that is a question because it was my question too. I asked Daniel the night he gave me the tape whether after all of that the thing ever returned to the line. He did not answer me directly. He just said that he still sets food out past the woodshed some nights, the way he has for 19 years now, and that he does not always check in the morning whether it is gone because there are some mornings he would rather not know. I have decided not to ask him anything more than that. The thing that came in the mail 3 months ago, the thing that made Daniel finally show me the tape and made me finally tell you all of this, I am not going to describe either. It is enough to say that it convinced both of us that the silence we had kept was a kind of lie we could no longer afford, and that someone somewhere should hear the truth of what happened to Tommy, even if no one can ever prove a word of it. So that is the truth, for whatever it is worth, from the one person who has watched the tape all the way through. My brother fed a person in the woods for 11 years. My cousin tried to film that person up close. And on a Tuesday morning in late August, across a creek my brother will not cross again, my cousin vanished off the face of the earth and left nothing behind but a camera in the leaves with the red light still on. They are still looking for him. They will not find him. And the tape stays in the drawer. Real or fake? You decide. Then tell me in the comments what you would have done with that camera if it had been your hand that picked it up out of the leaves. I will leave it there for tonight.